This week is a selection of interesting topics related to sexuality. Some of these are topics that I've personally studied, friends with benefits, faking orgasms, and some are topics that I simply find really interesting, like sexual frequency and gender and polyamory. I'll just say a few words about the friends with benefits research because that was actually with an honors student here at SMU. Maybe you're not a psychology major, or maybe you are, but the thought of doing an honors thesis hasn't really crossed your mind. Regardless, it's interesting to think that even at this point in your academic career, you could actually do research that matters. The data that my student and I collected was actually the basis for a paper that we wrote, and it's been published in the Canadian Journal of Human Sexuality. And while the focus of that paper was different than the student's thesis, and even from what you'll read about in the upcoming lecture, it was still the data that he and I collected for his honors thesis. So he was ultimately interested in looking at whether sexual satisfaction differed in friends with benefits relationships from romantic relationships. Spoiler, didn't really matter much, the difference there. But because we had collected the gender for all our participants, we were able to also compare males and females. So when I first taught this course, I asked him to prepare some slides on gender and friends with benefits, and he lectured on the topic. To do the analyses, though, we actually had to exclude some people, and you might find this kind of interesting. So basically, in order to be able to interpret the results easily, we excluded people who did not identify their gender, so they didn't check off male or female, or who indicated a gender other than male or female. We allowed participants to write in an other option, and a minority identified themselves as genderqueer, bigender, agender, things like that. But there weren't enough of these individuals to compare them to males and females, so we removed them from the analysis to simplify things. Now, there are lots of cases in research where someone's gender shouldn't matter, and so you wouldn't remove them regardless of what gender they identify as. But when we're talking about sex, and specifically casual sex, we know that in this area there are both persistent gender stereotypes and real gender differences supported by research. So this is just something you need to be aware of when you're doing research so that you can be sure that when you do interpret the results, they make sense. In our case, we specifically wanted to compare men's and women's experiences with friends with benefits, so we needed to make sure that our groups were comprised of only those who identify as one of those two genders.